Underground irrigation or lawn sprinkler system. Question: one may wonder how the system works or what drives the system, etc. And the ultimate goal of a lawn sprinkler system is a no-brainer. It would be to water the lawn or the trees or the shrubs or whatever landscaping one desires. But notwithstanding the that would be the goal of the irrigation system. However, the mechanism that drives the sprinkler system would be water and water pressure. Let me reiterate: water and water pressure. So when the pressure comes down, and the pressure comes from the street side, generally speaking. Now, there are extenuating circumstances, wells, etc., but city water may be a more optimum choice when installing a sprinkler system, in my opinion. But notwithstanding, when the water pressure comes, water pressure varies from neighborhood to neighborhood. So you may go to one neighborhood and the water pressure may be somewhat low. You may go to another neighborhood and the water pressure may be somewhat high. So the question being here, what drives the water pressure? A good and an optimum water pressure for residential may be somewhere in the range of 65 to 75 psi. And this would be adequate to run a lawn sprinkler system. So the question here, what happens is the water comes in and it comes, this part here would sit inside of this casing here, and the water actually comes from the bottom up and it pushes and it drives this spring here. So once the spring is driven, then the top part, which is the sprinkler head itself, say if this were flush with the ground, then the water pressure would push this up against this spring and there would be resistance here. Now, once the resistance here, and as long as the water pressure, as long as you don't have a leak and the water pressure stays strong, then the sprinkler head would continue to rotate, or if it's a pop-up head, continue to spray. It depends on what type of head you have. Now, one thing to take note of here, this pop-up, this not pop-up, this oscillating head, it looks like the spring may be a little bit larger, so it may take a little bit more pressure to drive this up. So what happens when the water dies out, then the spring expands. So this, I guess when the water comes up, it may compress the spring. If the irrigation experts can elaborate, that would be wonderful. But it would compress the spring. The head would come up. Once the head's driven up, and I think it would compress the spring. Now let me it's difficult to say. So it would it looks like here the head, so it apparently my opinion is it may compress the spring, and then when the water pressure subsides, then the spring recoils. Okay, the question being, okay, and this may be a question for the engineers out here, how does one, when manufacturing these springs, get this spring? This is not a rhetorical question, this is an actual question. How does one measure, say, the PSI it would take? So if you were running 65 PSI of water pressure, that would be strong enough to press on this spring. And when the pressure died, it would release. However, where the question marks lie in my mind is, how do the engineers test these springs to know? Because these springs have to be to my way of thinking, and I may be wrong here, but I'm just kind of brainstorming, but I would say the springs would need to be in the range of 65, 75 psi plus or minus, in order, plus or minus, just to get it up to compress the spring. Now, once the water pressure dies, you don't have pressure against this, so then the spring just opens up, and so basically, I guess a pictorial here would be when I push this down, then this spring is compressed. Okay, and say we turn the water off, and then when to turn the water off, the spring opens up. But to the engineers or the educators out there, how do they measure these springs according to, because it would need to be measured according, I'm thinking, to my way of thinking, somewhere in the range of X amount of PSI, but how is this done? That's a question to the, say, the engineer experts or educators, etc. But anyway, this is what happens. It presses it, the head pops up, then it recoils the spring, and it drops back down when the pressure dies down. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.